Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Voices of Recovery. I'm your host, Michele Eich. And every week I interview people who have overcome a life controlling issue with God's help. And today my guest is Tyler. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. So, Tyler, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, yeah, my name's Tyler Schmidt. Currently living in Cincinnati on the west side, but I'm from Bright, Indiana. 37 years old, married, no kids. A combat vet, was in the Air Force. Part of a ministry that deals with the lost and broken, and just shows the love of Jesus Christ. And I've just been on this walk for about 7 years now, and I'm pretty blessed to know God, and pretty blessed to be where I'm at. So I just continue to share the message and love of God to others, and it's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, you said a lot there. So, I don't know if you saw a recent interview that I did with Michael, but Michael was on with his mom, Debbie, and Michael was addicted for about 20 years. And while he was in jail, you came to visit him. And that was really the turning point in his life where he got into sober living. And so we're going to talk about all of that. But when Michael shared that, I was like, I've got to meet Tyler, and I did. And I heard you speak the other night. So anyway, I'm just really excited for our viewers to hear your story because it's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank
An
you.
honor. An honor.
Okay, so Tyler, tell us when the drug and alcohol use started in your life.
Sure. So for me, as far as I can remember, what first kind of traumatic experience happened that kind of kicked off any type of use was my parents got divorced, and it really freed up a lot of time for me to kind of do whatever I wanted to. I could play my parents off of each other. My dad worked third shift, so or night shift. He worked 12-hour shifts. So I could get away with a lot in the evening, especially when my mom worked. It gave me a lot of freedom to do whatever I wanted to do. You know, I think back in middle school, we explored with weed. Then eventually I started selling weed. And then the weed guy started selling acid. Then I get my hands on some acid. And, psychedelics are a big part of my story. Started selling a lot of drugs in high school. And, so middle school into high school was kind of my first taste of using, drugs, psychedelics. Also, drinking on the weekends was the big thing for us too. Having an older brother, and he was hanging out with a lot of guys that were in sports, and a lot of these, we called them jocks back in high school, but they threw a lot of parties on the weekends. Having the older brother, I'd always tag along. So at a young age, I was tagging along to these parties where we were drinking pretty heavily, and drugs were always involved.
Sure. And so, we want to say that I just don't want to have parents watching thinking, oh my gosh, I've got a divorce, I've been through a divorce, and I've ruined my kids' lives. I mean, it happens. And I've been divorced, and I was a teacher for over 20 years, and I saw a lot of kids. I taught middle school, and I saw a lot of kids who, like you said, you can play the parents off of each other. Um, you can start to manipulate things. So, it happens. We're not here to be in condemnation for anybody, but the reality is that God designed a home to be with two parents and working together. And so I just kind of wanted to add that, but I appreciate your insight on that for sure, because I think that that does open a door for some things to happen when the family unit breaks up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so you're partying, you're starting to sell drugs. You have an older brother who's influencing you. You mentioned earlier that you are an Air Force veteran, so I want to thank you for serving our country. But
Mm,
how did
thank
you kind of go from dealing drugs to joining the military?
you. Sure. So, back to the high school thing. I was always in a lot of fear. My whole life, I
Mm,
was dealing with a lot of fear and lacked a lot of discipline and never had any purpose. So going through high school, I was fearful of college because of the work. I thought, well, the
mm,
work's going to be hard. I didn't have any discipline, and I thought it would be hard, so I didn't even mess with it. But my like easy way out was like to get like in a portfolio together with all this artwork I had done because I like to do artwork, and I won a scholarship. So I went to art college straight out of high school out in San
wow.
Francisco, and that worked for a while because the classes were easy in the beginning, but as soon as they start to get tough and, they were talking about homework and all this stuff, I eventually withdrew and then just floated around San Francisco like a gypsy for like a whole year and got into a lot of drugs, drinking. I could buy alcohol out there kind of like anywhere because I looked old
Mhm,
enough and just got spun out. And I remember I called my mom like crying one day, like, help me get home. And she got me a bus ticket, came home, and then like the same thing kind of continued. I didn't have any direction. I was
mhm,
drinking a lot and got into selling drugs and kept end up going into this cycle that never really went anywhere and always ended me up in like depression and sleeping a
mm,
lot and all that. So I remember my mom came home one day from work and I was like sleeping in her bed. I think she had a water bed back then. And I used to like, I was like squatting at my mom's house. It's like 5 p.m. And I'm like sleeping in her bed because she had like the most comfortable bed, and she like pulled the curtains back. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And she's like, "What are you doing? Like sleeping in my bed and it's 5 p.m." And I remember just being broken, lost. And
mhm,
she said, "You know what? I signed you up to meet a recruiter." And I was like, "All right, whatever." So it was like days after that, I meet this recruiter and he's like, "You need to get cleaned up, take them earrings out." I had these huge gauges and I had a tattoo on my head. He was like, "You need to get that removed. You need to take those earrings out." So, I mean, long story short, I did everything I had to get in. I go through, basic training and get to my base. And then at my Air Force base, it was 18 to drink. So it was like, there's tons of young people in the military,
right.
and all these young people allowed to drink at my base. It was in Mississippi and Columbus, Mississippi. And so, like partying every weekend. I remember I used to tell people like, "Hey, I'm an alcoholic," and used to be like proud of it, like I was bragging.
Wow.
And so I think I got a DUI. I missed a deployment, got in trouble, got out of that DUI, and then got in trouble again, almost got kicked out. And they said, "You know what, we're going to send you to Iraq." So they sent me to Iraq on another deployment. And in Iraq, it was, I was over in this army base. We were attached to an army unit at this like Iraqi, they called it an internment facility, but it was, kind of
Mhm,
like a prison. And it was called Camp Buka. So I was there for, 8 or 9 months. And, that was pretty wild, seeing a lot of stuff out there, regular prison stuff, stabbings,
mm,
escapes, all the above. And so when I came back home, I was in Mississippi. The whole paradigm had shifted and it went to this like important job where I was doing life and death stuff to back home in small town Mississippi where everyone was always on my case. And I was
mhm,
a cop, they made me like patrol the area with a cop car and all these guns and stuff. And I remember I went to go like load up my gun to start shift and I had a panic attack.
mm,
And so from then on I started to deal with like panic attacks. I guess from Iraq, I don't know. And got put on some medication, started drinking to compensate. I got in trouble again. They deployed me, and I ended up going to Qatar on my second deployment. And even over there, you could have like 3 beers a day. And so, my job was I worked the front gate of this base, and I knew all the people that worked the bars. And I got real drunk one night and went into this girl's room, and you're not allowed going into the opposite sex's room. And
mhm.
they made a big deal about it and like arrested me on the spot the next day and
Wow.
got in trouble overseas. And when I came stateside, they kicked me out. And so, um, that's kind of my military experience. I was in for 3.5 years. Alcohol really got me in a lot of trouble,
Right.
uh, from DUIs to being kicked out to, all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up in the military. And then I went, professional with my drinking while I was in the military.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you had a lot of fear and that you really didn't know your purpose. So I'm thinking that when you came back from the military, that that's even escalated, just kind of floundering, not knowing really what to do with your life. At this point in your life, Tyler, is God really on your radar at all? I mean, had you been raised to know God at all, or is he just non-existent in your mind?
Yeah, nowhere on my radar for real. I don't think I went to church in years. When we were younger, my family went to, I think, a Methodist church for a while.
Hmm.
When they got divorced, we really didn't go back to church. Um, Never heard anybody talk about relationship with God, or not that I can remember.
Right.
I had heard people talk about God, but as far as a relationship with God, or really, you know, the power of God, I had no clue,
Right.
or really desire or need yet. I thought at that point, after the military, I thought I could still control, my destiny and what was going on in my life, and all this.
And I think
So
a lot of people live there that, we're in charge and we're going to get this thing going. But I was just thinking about understanding your purpose. And I feel like there are a lot of people, young and old, who don't know their purpose. And without the God piece, it's hard to know your purpose because we're created to know Him. We're created to be in a relationship with Him. That is our purpose. And then what He does beyond that is different for each and every person. Um, so that's interesting. Okay, so you're out of the military and you're drinking what you said professionally, right? Um, and you start to kind of get into trouble. Um, when I heard you speak the other night, you mentioned that you were in and out of rehab. When does rehab kind of come into the picture for you at that point in time in your life?
so while I was in the military, they made me go to some kind of outpatient thing,
Okay.
which kind of was a joke. Um, my experience with outpatient then and even after the military, was, you know, it really, didn't do nothing for me.
Okay.
But I experienced a lot of inpatient after the military. So I think, probably, yeah, I would say 1.5 to 2 years after the military, I started to dabble with heroin and drinking, and then found a need. Once I found out that I had, military benefits at the VA, I did a lot of, almost all my inpatient treatments at the VA.
Okay.
And so that would be like, I think, like, 21 to 30 days inpatient, where they would talk about all the stuff that I would years later just do. You know, they
Mhm.
talked about meetings, talked about the steps, um, they talked about God. Um, they weren't faith based, kind of a treatment place, but
Mhm.
they talked about these things. People would come in who would talk about God made these things happen, and they would work steps and go to meetings. And then also we do a little bit of therapy, group therapy, talking about, your hurts or trauma, or, stuff like that, maybe related to maybe why you use, what you're suffering with,
Sure.
etc. And so there was a lot of like group therapy in conjunction with meetings, one-on-one with counselors, and just, I think I went in a total of like maybe 5 or 6 times. And what stuck was that people were coming in to do meetings in these treatment centers who had found a solution, who had
Mhm.
definitely been radically transformed. And so a lot of that stuff stuck with me,
So it sounds like seeds were being planted,
for sure.
but maybe you weren't really ready to let go. You know, when I was interviewing Michael the other day, we talked about hitting your rock bottom, and everybody watching you is like, "Oh, you've certainly hit rock bottom, right? Because you have had these DUIs, you've had the XYZ, but until you have come to that place personally, the crowd and the opinion of the crowd really doesn't matter, right?"
Absolutely. I always tell people that rock bottom is like a unique emotional cut,
Mm,
and everyone's unique emotional cut looks different. You could
right.
lose your kids, you could have cancer, lose your kids and be in jail and still not be at your rock bottom because you haven't been cut that way that
Mm,
will motivate the willingness it takes to lay down your cards.
right. Interesting. Okay. So you kind of go through these rehabs, and it sounds like they were saying the right things and introducing you to the things that you need to do, but it really, I don't know. Like I said, seeds are planted, right? And God wastes nothing. So what's next for you at this point in time? You're in the VA, you're out of the VA system. Um, what happens next?
So, I still thought that I just needed to get the right job and things would straighten up
Okay.
or go back to school. Finally went back to school and got a career. So I
Hmm.
did all this stuff, you know. Went and got a good job at a bank and then almost lost it because heroin addiction and then quit and then went to school and thought, I'm in school. This is the purpose, the path I need to be on for things to
Right.
straighten up. And I remember even like halfway through hair school, I had to quit, like go on like a short-term disability to go into treatment
Mm,
and get on medicine to help me not use heroin. And then went back to school, graduated, came out, did hair, and then I was drinking hardcore, couldn't build a clientele, would have this job or that job, and I would lose it.
sure.
And it was like everything I touched was just falling out of my hands. And
Wow.
then it was like, it might have been a year or two I was doing hair and it was sad to watch, you know? And I remember my dad, he came in one time and, I was on methadone at one point and I was sweating like crazy, cutting his hair. I weighed like 60 or 70 pounds overweight because of the methadone. Then just sweating like crazy. And I remember he would tell me when I got clean, he would say like, I just remember being so sad coming in there watching you, because you were like a
Yeah.
zombie. And I was like a zombie. And at the end it was like I was drinking and driving, got a DUI, lost my license, was on probation, was still driving, got a third DUI, 30 days later got a fourth DUI. So then it
Wow.
was like then I was dealing with the legal system to where
Right.
they forced treatment on me for 90 days. I would come out and I remember like the same kind of deal at the VA. I remember like, you know, hey, get a sponsor, recovery housing this, meetings that, steps, all this stuff that I remember hearing. And I would go out and I would just put my toe in some of it. I would get a sponsor,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't go forward with the steps. I wouldn't do an inventory. I would go to meetings, but I would go like one here or there, chasing a lot of women. I just wasn't serious. I wasn't locked in to see it all through. I was
Sure.
dabbling in it and still trying to do what I wanted to do. And eventually, I got suplexed again because I violated probation, and that was, within this time frame is, when I was dealing with the liver cancer stuff, my last stint in treatment at the VA, and then shortly after that, I did my last treatment in the jail treatment. It was called Turning Point. So it was mandated by a judge,
Mhm.
and then that was the last time I did treatment. Where I found that I knew God was real because I'd seen him in my brother's life. I had got a healing in my liver, so I knew there was power in it. And so that's where I began to just press in, seek God, pray, read his word every day from that point on in that jail program for 90 days.
Mhm.
And that's been like every day since then. That was like
Okay.
7
Awesome,
years.
awesome. Well, there's a lot to talk about within that, but I want to back up before we get to, we haven't talked about the cancer diagnosis and healing and all of that yet, but you mentioned something earlier that kind of rang my bell. You said, I just thought if I got the right job, then everything would be okay. And I
Mhm.
think that that is where a lot of people live. It's like, if I get the right relationship, if I find the right guy or girl, or if I get the right school, if I get this, if I get fill in the blank. And I think it's our mind fooling us that there's some magic wand out there that's going to make everything okay. And what we don't realize is that it's God. It's God. It's not the job. It's not the significant other. It's not um, the house with the picket fence or anything else that we can come up with. It's God that we really need. That's the void that we're trying to fill with all the other stuff, right? All right. Um,
Absolutely.
so,
Absolutely.
so you mentioned, Tyler, that your brother came to faith. So this is the same older brother that kind of maybe led you into some not so great choices. You were kind of following him with the party scene and everything like that. But he finds God, and then that has a major impact on you. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So he went to Teen Challenge,
Mhm.
and Teen Challenge, a lot of God in that place. You
Mhm.
know, they do a lot of studying. They go to a lot of churches, um, very Christ centered. And so he had been in there for maybe a year or so, and I knew he was different.
Mm.
And he would share some things here and there when he would come back on the weekends for passes or whenever he would come back and visit. And he would talk about some of this stuff. So I knew he was different. I knew he was talking about God. It didn't all make total sense, but I knew that God was in that equation and that he was different.
Right.
And so, we've always been very competitive, and we bang heads a lot. But I remember the last time I got in trouble for violating probation, it was like he came to court for me and
Mm.
was like, Tyler needs to go to Teen Challenge. And so they let me go to Teen Challenge. And I was there for 30 days. And I wanted to use like almost that whole time I was there.
Mm.
And I came back to the VA to get a physical for Teen Challenge, like after 30 days. And I got dropped off by my sponsor, and I dipped out real quick, went to the payday loan place, took out some money, called my dope boy, got some heroin and some needles, and brought this back to Teen Challenge. Shot up. I got really faded. They all knew, and they kicked me out. And
Wow.
so, like the next day, I had to go to court to tell them how I was doing at Teen Challenge. So, I remember my brother picking me up. He was real disappointed, and so I knew that my brother was different. And my experience with Teen Challenge wasn't the same as my brother's. When I went to court the next day, they obviously locked me up. I went to that jail program where I eventually got clean. But I can remember, God speaking to me when I was in jail the last time, and it was like what kept coming to me was Teen Challenge transformation. And after that experience, I kind of realized like, yeah, Teen Challenge transformation, but it was like I would go to Teen Challenge and then have my transformation. It wasn't necessarily at Teen Challenge. And
Okay.
so, I know shortly after that Teen Challenge experience, I started to really get serious with God, started to pray consistently every day. And God started to speak to me. in some pretty powerful ways. So that's kind of how my brother influenced me in that, but it kind
Okay.
of shifted me into a different trajectory. And
Right.
so our paths are similar but are very different, you know.
Right. And it's not a one size fits all situation. You know, God puts us in our own on our own journey, and it looks different for everybody. Um, but one thing you said earlier, Tyler, is that you didn't understand what was happening with your brother, but you saw that he was different. In other words, you saw the evidence or fruit of the transformation within him, and then it was just a matter of whether or not you wanted the same thing for yourself at that point.
Hmm. Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Now, where does the cancer diagnosis come in? Because when you spoke the other night, you testified to God's healing power, and that was an amazing part that I did not know about you. But in the midst of you drinking and using, you find out that you have liver cancer. And how old were you at the time?
I think I was 27, 28,
Wow.
maybe 28,
Okay.
that my late 20s. Yeah. And I mean, all through school, well, actually the military, after the military, and all through hair school, I was drinking like those energy drink kind of malt liquor things, Four
Hmm.
Locos, the Sparks, that were like very strong. And, I would drink those almost every day, several
Hmm.
of them every day. And at the end, um, through my kind of going to hair school, working at hair salons experience, it was like an all around the clock thing.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of like opioid use within there.
Hmm.
Um, but for many years, I drank hardcore, every day. And it was like one of the times I went to inpatient treatment at the VA. They do your blood work, and they were like, "Hey, we need to bring you downstairs to talk to this doctor." So, I found myself talking to all these doctors, and they were like, "Your liver enzymes are like crazy high. We need to do some more testing." And they end up doing like some CTs, some MRIs, some more blood work. They end up doing a liver biopsy. And, through all this, they showed me like this scan with, I had two pretty decent sized lesions on my liver.
Hmm.
And they were, they couldn't give, and I had hep C as well. I don't think they could give me the hep C medicine yet because I was too sick. But I would go on in the future to get that medicine and get healed from hep C. But with the liver cancer and all that stuff, um, yeah, I got brought to um, like this house, this prayer meeting, like I was sharing, where all these people would pray over me for a very long time. And it was a prophet who I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what anything was. Speaking in tongues, praying in tongues. I didn't know what any of these things were. I didn't know what a prayer meeting was. It was like all this foreign stuff to me, but I was like in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And they, the prophetic man knew like right away before I even told him anything, kind of what was going on, and kind of called me out and, asked if he could pray for me, and led this pretty long, powerful prayer. And then at the end of it was just like, the hands of Jesus, have removed this from your liver. You'll see what I mean when you
Praise
go to your
God.
next test.
Wow.
So, it was not too long after that, I would get a couple tests, and the VA was like, we need to do more tests because they couldn't find the lesions.
Yeah.
And from when I had these two pretty major sized lesions on my liver to when the time I got prayed for, wasn't that long of a stretch of time. So it
Okay.
wasn't like years later I go get tested and oh, they're gone. It was a pretty close in time ordeal. And, like I said, that
Wow.
was kind of my first taste of, okay, is God real? This is definitely some
Yeah.
power. Um, Something that I don't know about, but that I've heard a lot of people talk about in treatment. at meetings. Now I'm hearing my brother talk about it. So it
Sure.
was kind of like, one of the seeds that really was a catalyst to kind of to growing them all.
That's amazing. The word about kind of stands out to me because, we hear about prayer, we hear about God, we hear about healing. But when you have that experience with powerful prayer, I mean, it wasn't just, oh, Tyler, we'll pray for you. And then you kind of go on your merry way. It's like, no, have a seat, son.
Hmm.
And then, that intensive prayer. So you experienced a miracle because liver cancer at the age of 27 is usually a death sentence. And you mentioned the other night that you even contemplated just kind of drinking yourself to death. Um,
Hmm.
but God had other plans for you. So that's
Absolutely.
awesome. Okay, so you get healed and you live happily ever after and you never use again, right? Uh,
No, so yeah, I went pretty hard,
hmm,
probably for another year or so after that experience.
okay.
It might have been right around a year, but it was like I've never followed up with anything after that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was open to God, but like my walk with God isn't just like God do a bunch of stuff for me. It's like
Right.
um what comes to mind is like the parable where God gives all the coins to people. What are you doing with your coin? And
Wow.
so that's why I tell a lot of guys that have an encounter with the steps, recovery. It's, who are you testifying to? What are you doing with your coins? 'Cause God will take them back. And I've
Mm,
seen a lot of people lose their coins. So for me,
wow.
it's like once you've been pulled back from the slaughter and have been commissioned and given a sword, if you don't use the sword will be taken out of your hand. And it is a battle, so you need a sword.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like how me and all my guys how we roll, because you got to be um, making moves out here and not just hanging out and doing whatever you want to do, and because God will bless you. You can get some things. You can have whatever shoes you want. You can have whatever house you want. You can have the girl
Yeah.
of your dreams. Um, but that really doesn't mean nothing. Don't equate to nothing. Really, in reality, it almost doesn't even do nothing. I mean, it's good to be blessed and live a prosperous life and all that,
Mhm.
but here now where I'm at, I feel very blessed. But it's like when I had less, things were simpler, and I could really get and do a lot of God's work when things were simple. So it's
Right.
like once you get things, money, wife, kids, you still got to be diligent and be about God's business,
Right.
because it's not like we've arrived once you get the desires of your heart. Um,
Amen.
so yeah.
Those are some powerful words of wisdom right there, Tyler. And that spoke to me. So, we can't bear our talents. We've got to be moving forward into what God has for us and get out of our comfort zone. So, amen. All right. So at this point in time, you're still using a year after the cancer healing. You mentioned earlier that you hadn't been cut yet. We talked about hitting rock bottom. Um, you've had several DUIs. You've been kicked out of the military. You had some serious health issues where you literally could have died within a year. Um, what was it that cut you? What was the turning point for you?
So I remember exactly what it was. It was so at the very end with these DUIs, I failed to mention, but the judge I had when I got out of that first jail treatment, I was put on probation. And this guy from vet court's like a drug court where they you come in once a week or every other week. And you go in front of the judge, they follow you, they work with the VA, and they do your care through the VA. And he said, "You want to do vet court, and we'll do your treatment through the VA, your aftercare, and all this." So I agreed to it because I wanted to change. So at the end there, I was on probation for the DUIs doing veterans treatment court. And so I got real close to the judge, the prosecutors, the people on the treatment team. I see these people weekly. And that's where, when my brother came to court for me, I remember I was like crying in the courtroom. I really wanted to get clean. I wanted to do good. They were encouraging me. They seen me kind of slip and then grow. So they seen me through this kind of, it was, like I said, it was probably a year I was on vet court, in vet court. And at the end there, when things were getting kind of wobbly, my brother came to court and it was real emotional, like, because I wanted to do good. I wanted to
Right.
change my life. And they, with hesitation, they were like, all right, Tyler, we're going to let you do this, good luck. And it was like, after 30 days, I was kicked out and had to go in front of all those people. And I remember going to court. On my way to court, I copped some dope, did it, went to court. I was faded in the courtroom, and the prosecutor like looked at me and was like, "He's high now, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yep." Like they had pulled all my cards, like I had nothing else to
Mm,
stand on. Everything had just fallen out under me, and all the people who wanted me to do good, who I had this really powerful bond with, um, it was like total failure right there in the
mm,
courtroom. And so she sentenced me to that turning point, the jail program, 90 days. And I remember like after that, like I could breathe. Like I knew like, okay, like that was almost like my point of surrender. And it
mm.
was like a tangible thing for me, like right when I left the courtroom, because they handcuffed me, took me away. And what's pretty amazing, like 6 months after I got out of jail, I was in recovery housing, and I went back to that judge, and she was like, do you want to be a mentor? So for like probably 3 or 4 years, I was a mentor in her court. And that's kind of how I really got a ton of resources and relationships down at the courthouse from a lot of
Right.
judges, a lot of prosecutors, a lot of attorneys, from that vet court kind of mentorship thing that I had after I got clean. That just blew up for me and
Awesome.
opened a lot of opportunity for even the job I have now,
Right.
coordinating treatment for different people. That's how I met a lot of people down there from that experience. So it wasn't like a total waste. It was like God used it all,
Yeah.
and then connected me back to the same courts, and then it went to muni, felony docket, to other judges. And so I mean, now I know, anybody who I need to know, I know down at the courthouse there. So
Absolutely. So that last time you used heroin and then you went into that program for 90 days, was that it? Was
yep,
that was your cut? That was the last time you were ready?
yep.
You were ready. Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
You mentioned that somebody came in to, I believe it was the jail, to talk about sober living. And then later you became that person as you're sharing that God was preparing you and he weighs nothing. And, it sounds like you were kind of in the same school I was, the school of hard knocks. We
Yep.
graduated from the same school, Tyler. But, it's this training for reigning. And it doesn't look like going to Yale or going to art school or, but it's God is not, I'm not saying that he's causing these things to happen, but he's using the experiences that we've had, good and bad, for our future and for our destiny. And so I have a funny story to share with you. Unfortunately, this didn't get recorded when I videotaped Michael and Debbie. But as I mentioned earlier, Michael shared that Tyler came to visit him in jail. And Tyler was an answer to prayer for Michael because he's like, okay, God, send me somebody. And while Michael was in jail, they said, you have a visitor. And he said, oh, my lawyer's here. So he went down and he said, I saw this tall, lanky guy with tattoos and a mohawk. And I said, that's not my lawyer. And I laughed so hard because it was a funny and cute story, but it's also a powerful story of how God using you to go back into that jail and to be a lifeline to somebody who was ready to get help.
Mhm.
And it just has to, I don't know, how do you feel when you hear a testimony like Michael or somebody else who you've literally gone in and witnessed to? I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear those testimonies?
I mean, there's nothing better, you know? He was broken. Um, I just love the fact that I can walk into any pod in the jail. Like,
Right.
I could go right now and just slide into the jail, you know? And it's just crazy because, like, I've been in the jail a lot, but it's like just the power of God to where he's using somebody to
Right.
go back into jail when it's hard to get into jail, even if you're, a pastor or something. So hearing those stories is like, it definitely makes all the hard work, it makes all the hard work worth it, And not
Right.
that I'm like, I see it as man, this is like some hard work. I kind of just, it's like in my DNA.
Mhm.
Like I knew early in the game, like it was like God was saving me on purpose for a purpose. You hear that all the time, but it was like, it was deeper. It was like revelational.
Mhm.
I don't know if this is a word, like revelational commission, being commissioned revelational, you
Yeah.
know, to where it's like, um, I will give you the favor and the power to go to places and find the people that are ready to be plucked out, you
Amen.
know? And so, like right now in my life, it wasn't always like this, but I stay on the hunt for people like where Michael was. And I hit him with a bunch of questions in the beginning to find out if he was really, A, broken, B, able to like listen
Yeah.
and C, willing to just keep moving his feet forward as I'm giving him the direction until God speaks to him. Because I don't really have to tell you God this, God that. Maybe
Right.
I'll share some of my story, but I'll share the instructions how to get him in line. And God always, I mean, almost all the guys I've plucked out, God's gave them the revelational knowledge. And a lot of times when they speak, I'm like, damn, that's hot. But
Yeah.
they didn't learn it like God downloaded it. So with a
Yes.
lot of guys, like a guy like Michael or a guy who's just ganged up from the street, whatever, um, they need the God of the universe to speak to them. They don't
Yeah.
need somebody to say, hey, that's bad. God says this. Although that stuff's good, but you got a rough guy that probably just needs God to just totally
Yeah.
come into his life in a very tangible way. So that's why I like kind of doing what I do.
Mhm.
Definitely sharing testimony is powerful. But a lot of these guys, if you when I share like, hey, look, this is what I did. I really got down and started being consistent with God, praying consistently and doing this work and looking at myself, examining myself, inventorying my life, and really trying to set things in my life right. If they do that work, which is all biblical, it's like God just
Yeah.
just transforms that individual in a very powerful way. Sometimes very, very
Amen.
quickly, but sometimes over a period of time. But I've seen
Amen.
guys, like I got a guy right now who's not even that far in the process, who I've made a few suggestions to. He's in his word every day, praying hardcore. He used to be a guy that like we used to beef a lot and fight a lot in high school, and now I'm
Mm.
sharing like God and just kind of what I did, and
Yeah.
God speaking to this guy in like the most powerful way. I'm jealous, these new guys in here that are just broken,
Yeah.
you know, when they apply like some of these things to their life, it's like the freshest revelation, the freshest
Mm.
power and transformation in their mind, in their character,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which I ain't seen 37 years old. I've never seen anything rearrange a man's character that powerful in a
Yeah.
way that God does.
That's so powerful. I love that, Tyler. Um, you are reaching people that others can't. You can go into places that others can't. And, just putting people into condemnation and telling them just say no or you shouldn't be doing that doesn't ring anybody's bell. In fact, it might move them further away from God, unfortunately. So I love your heart and I love kind of your ninja style of getting into those places. And again, God is not wasting a thing in your life. So I was taking a look at your website and I will be posting your website, thelitmovement.org. And we'll talk more about that later. But one of the things that it mentioned was that 8 out of 10 people who are released from prison end up going back. And that's 80%. That's a staggering statistic. And you also mentioned that um, getting support in those first 2 weeks coming out of jail or coming out of prison is critical in not going back. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, sure. So I know, like myself and many others, if you're in jail, usually addiction, you've usually burned all your bridges. And so, for example, a guy can be locked up for 90 days. And even if he's locked up for 90 days or in treatment for 90 days, it's the same thing. You got a guy who's fresh 90 days under his belt who just needs to be planted in the right climate
Mm-hmm.
so he can
Mm-hmm.
grow. And so, a lot of times when people come out, they want to go, oh, see this girl, do whatever they want. And they usually get detoured, boom, and lose the 90 days, back in the
Mm-hmm.
same cycle. But what we're finding, there's a lot of men and women that come out who want to connect, but just don't know the right person or have the right resources. So, just a little history before the lit stuff, we raised a ton of money and just for a year just started to give out grants in the form of 2 weeks of rent to plug men and women into recovery houses.
Mm-hmm.
And to step into the recovery housing ourselves where we could directly catch like a guy like Michael.
Mm-hmm.
But anyone coming out of jail or prison, like I said, it's all about being planted where you planted. Are you planted where you can grow? And a lot of people, if they're in prison, where they came from, they weren't growing because they ended
Right.
up in prison. So a
Right.
lot of people go back because of a lack of another option or a lack of
Mm-hmm.
resource to do something different. So
Right.
we found out that this kind of like 1 to 2 week window was like perfect for just snatching people when they get out and placing them in the place where they can be around other men or women that are seeking healing, seeking God, seeking a new way of
Right.
life. And it was just like that gap that everybody was falling through that we
Sure.
knew that we could step in and make an impact.
I love that. Plant where you can grow. Plant people where they can grow. That is awesome. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the lit movement next time. So I'm going to interview your beautiful wife, Jen, next week. And then toward the end of her interview, I'm going to have you pop on and kind of talk about how your stories intertwine because you both have amazing testimonies separately, but you also have an amazing testimony together. And we'll talk more about the lit movement and kind of your vision for that and moving forward. But Tyler, do you have anything else that you'd like to add? I do appreciate your time, and I know you're very busy with all that you've got going, and you're using your sword, and you're using what God gave you, and you're in it, and I love that. Before we end this episode, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our guests?
Yeah, I'll share one thing because if you're going to talk to Jen, she'll probably bring it up. So, like I shared, right when my brother went to court with me and I went to Teen Challenge at the very end before I got clean, I can remember the day before I had court, I was in an alley in over the Rhine on Republic Street. And I remember like when I was locked up that last time, I was telling my brother, like, God spoke to me and he said, and I was telling my brother, like, I'm going to go to Teen Challenge and experience transformation. And the last piece I said to him was that I was going to marry Jen Molman because I had just met her. So fast forward like 5 years, boom, and like that's where our story picks up again. So I'm sure she'll
Cool.
tell that, but I share that to say God gives you the desires of your heart. I
Yes.
mean, almost every desire of my heart is manifesting or manifested since I've been walking with the Lord, and He gives me new
Yeah.
desires. But it's a powerful thing. Yeah, God's real.
Yes,
Wake
he
up.
is. Yes, he is. And I know that one of the desires of your heart is to see people set free. And as
Mm,
it says on your website, set the captives free. And that's what Jesus has called us to do. And it's his power that works through us to get that done. Tyler, it has been an
amen.
absolute pleasure to speak with you today. And I just so appreciate your time. Because, like I said, I know you're busy. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching this episode of Voices of Recovery. We're creating a safe place where people can go for support and encouragement on their journey with God. So if you're new to this page, please give us a like or a share. And if you feel led, I'd love it if you would share this message or host a watch party, because I believe there's somebody on your page who needs to hear what Tyler had to say tonight. So God bless you to our listeners. Tyler, God bless you. And
Mm,
we'll talk to
thank you.
Jen next week, and maybe we'll see you then as well.
Awesome. Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Bye bye.